I had never believed in ghosts, curses, or supernatural stories. I was the type of person who always searched for logical explanations. Strange sounds were old pipes, shadows were tricks of the light. Every scary story had a reasonable answer waiting to be discovered. That mindset was exactly why I accepted the assignment that would eventually destroy everything I thought I knew. I'm a freelance photographer who specializes in documenting forgotten historical places across America. Small towns hire people like me to photograph abandoned buildings, old churches, cemeteries, and landmarks before they disappear forever. Most of the work is peaceful. You spend long days walking through quiet places, capturing details that most people never notice. 2 years ago, I received an email from the Historical Society of a tiny town hidden in the mountains of Vermont. The town was called Ashmore Hollow. It had fewer than 400 residents, and according to the message, it was home to one of the oldest cemeteries in the region. They were restoring damaged records after a storm had flooded the town archives, and they wanted updated photographs of every gravestone before winter arrived. It sounded simple enough. When I drove into Ashmore Hollow, the town looked frozen in another century. Narrow streets wound between weathered wooden houses. A white church stood in the center with a rusted bell tower. Even during the middle of the afternoon, very few people were outside. I checked into the only motel in town. The woman behind the counter smiled politely until I mentioned the cemetery. "You'll want to finish before sunset," she said. I laughed. "Because of bears?" She didn't laugh back. "Because people who stay after dark don't enjoy what they find." I assumed she was trying to entertain tourists with local legends. "I'll be fine." She stared at me for several seconds before handing over my room key. "I hope so." The next morning, I hiked up a narrow trail leading through dense pine trees. About 20 minutes later, I reached the cemetery. It was beautiful in an unsettling way. Hundreds of gravestones leaned at odd angles beneath ancient oak trees. Moss covered almost every surface. Some graves dated back to the late 1700s. Others had become completely unreadable after centuries of weather. I spent hours photographing each section carefully. Around lunchtime, I noticed something strange. Every few minutes, I had the odd sensation that someone was standing behind me. Whenever I turned around, there was nothing except rows of silent graves stretching into the distance. I blamed my imagination. Old cemeteries have a way of making your mind invent things. By late afternoon, I had photographed nearly every grave except a small corner hidden behind a collapsed stone wall. The map provided by the Historical Society didn't even mention that section. Curious, I climbed over the broken wall. Unlike the rest of the cemetery, this area was completely untouched. Tall grass reached my knees. The air suddenly felt colder. Even the birds had stopped singing. There were only 7 gravestones standing there. Each one looked older than the rest. The first 6 belonged to members of the same family who had died between 1818 and 1824. Then I reached the 7th. At first, I thought exhaustion was making me misread the inscription. I cleaned away the moss with my glove. The letters became perfectly clear. My full name. Not just my first name, not just my last name, my complete name. The exact spelling. Even my uncommon middle name. For several seconds, I simply stared. It had to be some kind of coincidence. People can share names. But then I noticed the birth date. It wasn't from the 1800s. Instead of a normal year, the birth date was completely blank. Only the death date had been carved. October 14th, next year. The exact date that at that moment was 16 months away. I laughed nervously. Someone had obviously made a fake gravestone recently as a prank. I knelt beside it. The stone didn't look new. The edges were worn smooth by centuries of rain. Lichen had grown deep inside every carved letter. There was no way anyone had created it recently. I took several photographs. As soon as my camera clicked, the screen went black. The battery had been fully charged that morning. Now it wouldn't turn back on. My phone also lost signal. Then the temperature dropped again. A whisper drifted through the trees. It sounded like someone quietly saying my name. Once, then again, this time closer. I packed my equipment and left immediately. Back at the motel, I plugged the camera into my laptop. Every photograph from the hidden section was corrupted. Only black images remained. The rest of the cemetery photos were completely normal. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2:30 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside my motel room. Slow, measured, crunch, 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 as if someone were walking across gravel. The footsteps stopped directly outside my window, then came 3 gentle knocks. Not on the door, on the glass. I forced myself to look. Nobody was there. But written across the fogged window were 3 words. You found it. The letters slowly faded away before my eyes. The next morning, I went straight to the town archives. An elderly volunteer helped me search through centuries-old burial records. I showed him the photograph of the gravestone. The color drained from his face. Where did you find this? The hidden section. He closed the record book immediately. You weren't supposed to go there. Why? He hesitated. Because those graves shouldn't exist. He disappeared into a storage room and returned carrying a leather journal. This belonged to the first minister of Ashmore Hollow. The journal described strange events beginning in 1823. Villagers reported seeing people walking through the cemetery who looked exactly like living residents. Not similar, identical. Perfect copies. Days or weeks later, those residents died under mysterious circumstances. The minister believed the hidden graves didn't predict death. They recorded it before it happened. I laughed nervously. That's impossible. So is your gravestone. I couldn't argue with that. Before leaving town, I decided to visit the cemetery one last time. I wanted proof that stress had caused me to imagine everything. The hidden section was gone. The broken wall remained. But behind it there was only dense forest. No 7 graves, no clearing, nothing. I searched for over an hour. It had vanished. When I returned to the motel parking lot, I noticed mud covering my boots. Mixed into the mud were tiny white flowers. The same flowers that had surrounded the hidden graves. I hadn't imagined them. I drove home the next morning. Life slowly returned to normal. For several months, nothing unusual happened. Then the dreams started. Every night I stood inside the cemetery. Someone waited beside my gravestone. No matter how hard I tried to see their face, thick fog always covered it. The figure would point toward the stone, then whisper one sentence. You're almost here. I always woke at exactly 3:14 a.m. every single night. Eventually, I stopped sleeping altogether. The lack of rest affected my work. Clients complained, friends noticed I looked exhausted. I never told anyone the truth. Who would believe me? 6 months after visiting Ashmore Hollow, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed me standing beside the hidden grave. The picture had been taken from behind. I had never seen anyone else in that section. Written on the back were 4 words. You didn't come alone. I examined the image closely. At first, I saw only myself. Then I zoomed in. Standing between 2 trees behind me was another person. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. Their face was impossible to make out. I had absolutely no memory of anyone being there. After that, strange things accelerated. Mirrors sometimes reflected someone standing behind me. Security cameras inside my apartment randomly shut off for exactly 3 minutes every night. Neighbors claimed they saw me outside walking around long after I had gone to bed. One neighbor even waved to me through my apartment window while I was asleep inside. I checked my security footage. Nothing. Just 3 minutes of black screen every night. Exactly from 3:11 until 3:14. Then one evening, my front doorbell camera recorded movement. A man stood outside. He looked exactly like me. Same height, same face, same clothes. He stared directly into the camera for 20 seconds before walking away. Police assumed the footage had been edited. They never found anyone. I became obsessed with researching Ashmore Hollow. Old newspaper archives revealed dozens of unexplained deaths connected to the cemetery. Every victim had reported seeing someone identical to themselves shortly before dying. One article from 1891 included a sentence that terrified me. "The duplicate is never the ghost." I couldn't stop thinking about those words. If the duplicate wasn't the ghost, then who was? Nearly a year passed. October drew closer. The date on the gravestone approached faster than I wanted to admit. I convinced myself that surviving beyond that day would prove everything had been nothing more than coincidence. 3 weeks before the date, I received another package. This time it contained an antique pocket watch. Inside the lid was engraved one sentence: "Return before your place is taken." The watch had stopped permanently. At exactly 3:14, I finally gave in. I returned to Ashmore Hollow. The motel owner recognized me immediately. "I wondered when you'd come back. You knew. No one escapes the cemetery forever." She handed me an old key. The church. The abandoned church stood overlooking the graveyard. Inside, dust covered every bench. Beneath the altar, I discovered a locked trapdoor. The key fit perfectly. A narrow staircase descended underground. At the bottom waited a stone chamber filled with hundreds of journals. Every journal belonged to someone who had found their own grave. Most entries ended abruptly. The final journal belonged to a man named Samuel Pierce. His last entry read, "If you're reading this, you've already seen your name. The grave is not waiting for your body. It's waiting for your place." I kept reading. According to Samuel, every generation one person accidentally discovers the hidden cemetery. Once they see their grave, another version of themselves begins crossing into our world. Not a ghost, not a clone, something older, something that slowly replaces them. The process finishes on the date carved into the stone. The original disappears. Everyone else believes nothing changed. Only the replacement remains. Footsteps echoed upstairs. Someone had entered the church. I climbed back toward the sanctuary. Standing at the entrance was me. Not similar, exactly me. He smiled. "I've been looking everywhere." I couldn't move. He walked closer. "You've had your life. It's my turn." I ran. He didn't chase me. He simply watched as I fled into the cemetery. Without realizing it, I found myself back at the broken wall. The hidden graves had returned. My gravestone stood exactly where I remembered. Only one thing had changed. The death date was no longer 16 months away. It was today's date. The duplicate appeared behind me. "You understand now." I backed away. "What are you?" He smiled again. "The one people remember." Wind rushed through the trees. Every gravestone around me seemed to vibrate. Whispers surrounded the clearing. Hundreds of voices repeating my name. The duplicate stepped toward my grave. The earth began sinking. A dark opening appeared beneath the stone. Inside wasn't dirt, it was endless darkness. Hands reached upward from within, dozens of them, waiting. The duplicate extended his hand toward me. "If you go willingly, nobody suffers. And if I don't, they'll never know which one survived." He wasn't threatening me. He sounded sympathetic, almost sad. For one terrifying second, I wondered whether I was already the copy. The duplicate looked at me with pity. "That's the question everyone asks." Before I could answer, the church bell rang. 3 loud chimes. The duplicate froze. His expression changed from confidence to fear. The ground shook violently. Cracks spread across every gravestone. The hidden cemetery began collapsing into darkness. He reached for me. I stumbled backward. My foot caught a broken root. I fell. Everything went black. I woke up in a hospital nearly 2 days later. Hikers had found me unconscious near the cemetery entrance. The doctors said I had suffered dehydration, exposure, and a severe concussion. No one believed my story. The sheriff searched the cemetery. There was no hidden section, no underground chamber beneath the church. Nothing. Eventually, I accepted that nobody else would ever understand. Life slowly continued. Months passed. The nightmares stopped. The whispers disappeared. I convinced myself it was finally over. Until last week, I was renewing my passport online. The application required a copy of my birth certificate. As I compared my documents, I noticed something impossible. My signature wasn't mine. Every official record in my house showed a handwriting style I had never used. Old birthday cards, school certificates, tax forms, even childhood notebooks, all written by someone whose handwriting looked familiar, but not mine. My family insists that's always been my signature. Friends recognize it immediately. Only I remember writing differently. Yesterday I drove back toward Ashmore Hollow one final time. The road no longer exists. Modern maps show untouched forest where the town should be. State records claim no settlement by that name was ever established. The motel, the church, the cemetery. Everything has vanished. Last night I found muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom, only one set. They matched my shoes exactly. This morning I discovered fresh dirt beneath my fingernails. I haven't left my apartment in 3 days, and resting on my desk was an old cemetery photograph I know I burned months ago. This time, I finally noticed something I had missed before. There were never 7 graves, there were 8. The 8th stone stood in the background, almost hidden by fog. The inscription was impossible to read, except for one line carved beneath the name. It said, "He finally came home." I don't know whether I'm telling this story as the man who found his own grave, or as the thing that climbed out of it. The worst part isn't the uncertainty. The worst part is that every day my memories feel a little less familiar. My reflection smiles a fraction of a second before I do, and when I accidentally catch myself writing my name, it's always in the handwriting everyone insists has always been mine. If you ever visit an old cemetery and discover your own name carved into a weathered stone that should have been there for centuries, don't touch it, don't photograph it, and whatever you do, don't look too closely at the date. Because if the grave already knows who you are, then somewhere, something else has already started becoming you.